Hello there. So, I'm going to be trying something a little bit different here, and we're going to be trying to um, basically debunk some leftist myths about the Second Amendment. So, we're going to start with this video here. It's actually by, I think, it's supposedly a constitutional lawyer. So, let's check this out.
The founders would look at us today and be very puzzled. The idea that anybody could get a weapon of war, walk into a school and shoot it up, I think they would think that was crazy.
Well, I'm not sure that. Well, obviously, they think that, going into a school and shooting it up is crazy. But it's questionable whether or not they would think that getting a weapon of war is crazy. I mean, I think, you have to realize all of their guns that they had at the time were weapons of war. So, yeah, I mean, shooting up a school is crazy, but is getting a weapon of war crazy? Would the founders think that? Not sure if that's true. Let's continue here.
What's the exact wording of the Second Amendment? It's very short. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And we've been debating about what that means for centuries. The founders
Well, the debate has changed recently, and I don't think it changed in the way you think that it has, but we'll continue.
thought that the Second Amendment was about protecting against tyranny. They really thought that these militias of citizen soldiers
Yeah, notice citizen soldiers. That's very important, but let's continue.
could stand up to a potentially tyrannical central government. But they thought, as they said, that they had to be well regulated. They had to be following the laws.
Okay, so this is something I hear from the left a lot. They'll say, "Oh, but it has to be well regulated." Right, it has to be well regulated. But what does that mean? Because the left will say, "Oh, well, that means that we need gun control, and the Second Amendment says that we need to have, um, say, bans on certain guns." And I'm not saying that it excludes that, but that's not really what the word well regulated means. Um, so there was a landmark case in 2008 called DC versus Heller, in which they actually determined the meaning of the Second Amendment. And Scalia said, in his majority opinion, that well regulated implies nothing more than the imposition of proper discipline and training. So, and you have to remember, this is with respect to the militia. The militia was supposed to be trained by the states. So it's not talking about government regulations. It's talking about, especially not at the federal level. What I was talking about is the state uh, providing training so that they be ready for war. Ready for war. Not so that they don't accidentally shoot themselves, or, well, I mean, I guess that's implied, but that's not really the main purpose, right? And it's not to make sure that not laws keep criminals from having guns, although, believe me, I'm in favor of criminals not having guns, and I'm in favor of background checks and all that, but that's not implied in the Constitution. That's not what that means. Okay, and he continues to say, oh, well, they have to be following the laws. Right, obviously, and we're fine with them following the laws now too. It's not. This isn't um, Second Amendment supporters, or I guess the right versus people who think we should follow laws. That's not how that works. All right, let's continue.
They would think that we were taking their words and their ideas and twisting them beyond recognition.
I think more you're just strawmanning what the right's position is, because the right's position is not that there shouldn't be, that the people with guns should be following laws. Okay. The right is fine with background checks. They're fine with um, only law-abiding citizens having guns. They just don't want you to take away, guns like they are 15 from them.
Back in the time of the founding, there were gun laws. For example, in Boston, you were not allowed to have a loaded gun at home because they tended to explode and set fire to the houses.
Okay, Is this supposed to be somehow surprising? I mean, yeah, they had gun laws. I mean, again, we didn't think that there were no gun laws. I mean, I think they also had laws prohibiting uh, uh, carry of concealed firearms as well. Um, yeah, there's nothing. This is not shocking at all, and it's totally unrelated from what we were talking about. But let's continue.
1824, the Board of Regents of the University of Virginia voted to ban guns on campus. Who were these gun grabbers?
Okay, gun grabbers refers to people who want to take away guns. It's not. It's not referring to people who don't want guns on campus or people who don't want guns in particular government facilities or anything like that. And when people argue that things like, teachers should have guns at school or shouldn't have guns at school, or no, whenever people say that teachers should be allowed to conceal carry on school, it's almost never a Second Amendment question. I never heard anybody say, "Oh, well, the Second Amendment allows them to carry that." Although I might say that later. What it usually is just a practical thing. Okay. But let me show you something else. Okay. Let me show you this. So 82% of Democrats favor banning all semi-automatic weapons. I mean, to be fair, they probably don't realize what a semi-automatic weapon is. They probably think that this is referring to fully automatic weapons, which are already practically banned, and probably thinking of the AR-15 in particular. But they also, about 44%, think that handguns should be banned. Handguns. Do you hear this? Handguns. That's pretty much all guns. Okay, this is what we're referring to when we say gun grabbers. We're not talking about somebody who wants to ban guns from campus, although that might be problematic. We're referring to people who want to come and take away our guns, which, generally speaking, is the left. Anyway, let's continue.
Well, James Madison, who wrote the Second Amendment, and Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence. The founders would think the idea that you should arm everybody, and especially arm teachers, was crazy.
Okay, that's really not. I don't think that's a fair thing to say, okay? Just because, so they didn't know about school shootings back then. They didn't have the same kind of issues we have now. So they might not have passed that kind of law back then. The rule for the campus. All right, and here's a good reason to believe they might have changed their mind. So a lot of all of the laws, the Constitution and whatnot, were ultimately based on English law, and they got a lot of their political philosophy from from the commentaries on English law by William Blackstone. And he said regarding firearms, he said the right of having and using arms for self-preservation and defense. That's what he called. He called it a right. He called having and using arms for self-preservation and defense a right. And this is probably what the founders believed, because this is what was where they were getting their political philosophy from. So, and it's not just this. There's also commentary. Like, I think this is the first commentary on the Constitution, or on the Second Amendment, by St. George Tucker, and he says the right to self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine the right within the narrowest limits possible, wherever standing armies are kept, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited. Liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. So, listen, there was already this connection back then between self-defense and the Second Amendment, because all that the militia is a wider application of the principle of self-defense. I mean, it's a self-defense against a federal government, in particular, is what they were talking about. So, whenever it comes to schools and school shootings, I think this is just my opinion, but I think that the founders would think that not allowing teachers to be armed whenever they're getting shot at is, as Blackstone said, it would be a violation of the right of having and using arms for the self-preservation and defense. It would be a violation of a basic human right to force people to stay inside a building where they can't protect themselves and get shot at and not have a way of preserving their life, based upon the founders' basic philosophy. So I beg to differ. I think that the founders would probably be in favor of people being allowed to defend their basic right to life at schools.
Teacher would have shot the hell out of him before he knew what happened.
The U.S. Supreme Court didn't rule that the Second Amendment reflected an individual right to gun ownership until 2008.
Okay, well, this is a little bit misleading. Part of the reason for that is because there were no specific rulings on the Constitution prior to, with respect to this matter, prior to 2008. Now, specifically, there was a case, which I know from other videos I've seen by this guy, called Miller versus U.S. in 1939. So the basic idea of this case, what happened was, I think it was a National Firearms Act. It banned guns like sawed-off shotguns. And there were some bank robbers, and they had sawed-off shotguns. And the government tried to find them, and I guess probably imprison them from that. I'm not sure what the law was specifically on that. And what happened was they ultimately brought it up to the Supreme Court, saying that, hey, this is a constitutional right. I have a right to bear arms, right? Well, what the Supreme Court said was that that they didn't have a right to those weapons, because those were not weapons commonly used inside the militia. In other words, I mean, short barrel rifles are not something that can be used inside of a militia effectively. It's not common use. It's more something that people use who are criminals, who are trying to rob banks, as they were. So it's not necessarily constitutionally protected, according to the Supreme Court. Now, inside the U.S. DC versus Heller case, Justice Scalia interpreted this in a different way. First of all, he pointed out what I'm showing on the screen right now. Sorry about that. It said, he said, these show plainly enough that the militia comprises all males physically capable of acting in concerts for the common defense. All males, okay, not just a particular subset. And it continues saying that said when called for service, these men were expected to appear bearing arms applied by themselves and of the kind in common use at the time. So what this was specifically talking about is, sorry, somebody's in the chat. No, it's not pre-recorded. In case, let me just write this down. This is a live show. I'm trying to do these live shows. Anyway, so he's talking about it being specifically um, so the idea, if you go back to the Second Amendment, right, it talks about how a well-regulated militia being necessary for the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So why it makes a lot more sense if you think about it in this context, that the people were expected to bring arms to the militia. And that's why it says the right of the people to keep and bear arms, because they were expected to bring the arms for the purpose of the militia. And this specifically said, that's why it specifically says that here, basically in the Miller discussion. So it doesn't seem to support the idea that there is an individual right. That there isn't an individual right. In fact, it seems to support implicitly that there is an individual right, because if you don't have arms, then you can't supply them for the state militia. And that's the way that the Heller case interpreted it. So, and furthermore, there's also a case, other court rulings that were not in the Supreme Court, like the Supreme Court of Georgia, which ruled, as it says here, the right of the whole people, old and young, men, women, and boys, and not militia only, to keep and bear arms. So this is a case which is in 1846, which was very close to the same time as which the Constitution was actually written, and the Bill of Rights were written. I think it was before the Civil War, and they interpreted it as being a right that applies all of people outside of the context of the militia. So saying that prior, so he's kind of doing a little trick here. He's saying, well, the Supreme Court didn't rule on it until 2008, and he's going to try to say that this is changing things. But there's a long history of people interpreting the Second Amendment to apply more broadly than just to people who sort of join an official state militia. And that's affirmed by the Heller versus DC case. So let's continue.
This was the product of a concerted, very skilled, 30-year campaign by the National Rifle Association to change how we saw the Constitution. We changed our understanding as a country of what the Second Amendment meant, and not because of some dry words scratched on parchment, but because the gun rights lobby poured its energy into changing our view of the Constitution.
Okay, again, this is just plainly false. Let me show another example here. So James Madison was actually one of the people who introduced the Second Amendment. And you can see here, he's actually making an argument specifically against anti-federalists, that they were afraid that the federal government would try to take over the states. And so he's arguing, well, okay, so the maximum amount of the total people that can be inside of an army is about 1/25 of the total number of individuals which are able to bear arms. All right? And then he continues and says, well, this is about 25 or 30,000 at the time that he's writing. All right? And then he continues and says that to these would be opposed a militia amounting to near 500,000 of citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from among themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affection and confidence. The government's possessing their affection and confidence here refers to the state government. So where is he getting this 500,000 number? Well, if you multiply 25,000 by by 25, making it rather than 1/25th part, you make it the full number of people in the United States able to bear arms. That would be around 500,000. Okay? So he's specifically talking about here all able-bodied men being part of the militia. It's not just a select part of the government which is forced to be inside the militia by the government or by the state. It's actually all men. And going back to Hamilton, remember he was saying, well, it's not possible to train all these people in a way that's consistent with, like, top military training, because it would cause a huge problem for productivity if every single able-bodied man had to go to training once or twice a week or whatever, right? But he does have a suggestion on how we should do this. He says little more can be reasonably aimed at with respect to the people at large than to have them properly armed and equipped. And in order to see that this not be neglected, it will be necessary to assemble them once or twice in the course of a year. Okay, so notice this very closely. So first of all, he's talking about the people at large. That's everybody that's able to carry arms. And he's saying that we should, at most, we should have them properly armed and equipped. So he's saying that in order that this should happen, that it's not neglected, that we should require them to assemble once or twice a year. So what he's doing is he's saying that not only is he not saying that every person shouldn't have a firearm, he's saying that we should have every able-bodied man have a firearm, and we should make sure that they have them by having these yearly kind of organizations to make sure that they do have firearms. So this is not just a state militia selected by the government and paid by the government to be employed by the government to do this full time. It's every single person, every single man who's able to do this, that's not sick, ill, or too old, or anything like that. So these are the Federalist Papers. These are the papers that were involved in the forming of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So yeah, this guy is just completely wrong here. So let's continue.
Constitution. They want to pretend that it's an unlimited right, that any smart, sane law is an infringement on sacred freedom.
Yeah, that's not true. Again, the NRA doesn't have any problem with attacking particular laws, with presenting particular laws that promote gun safety. They just have problems with people that actually want to grab guns, people that want to make it extremely difficult to have guns, or unbearably unreasonably difficult to have guns. They don't want assault rifles banned. They don't want handguns banned. Okay. I would really appreciate it if people would stop lying about this.
And that's just nonsense. The Second Amendment does not prohibit, does not bar strong, sensible gun laws. Only political will and the broken political system stands in the way of that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that video is complete nonsense. Alright, so next video here I want to address. This guy wants to share his thoughts on gun control. Let's check this out.
Hey guys, I wanted to make a video that's a little out of the norm from what I usually do. This is in relation to the Stoneman Douglas shootings, and first and foremost I have to say that I'm incredibly proud of the way the kids have been handling themselves, how they've been demonstrating all across the country in the organization of marches and talks with people in political spheres. And usually,
Okay. Honestly, I can't stand these kids. At least the ones that I've seen. I mean, let me show you an example, okay?
It's hard to look at you and not look down the barrel of an AR-15 and not look at Nicholas Cruz, but the
This is what you're proud of? I mean, this kid, he is so annoying and so reprehensible. Like, why he's gonna call a politician the same as Nicholas Cruz? What did he do? I mean, he made gun laws that you don't agree with. Ah, so stupid. And this is so you think these guys are like model citizens? And let me ask you a question. So like, why is it that all of these kids are all um, gun control advocates? Like, have you ever thought about that? Like, like, would you be as proud of these kids if they didn't support gun control? Because you know there are some kids from that school. I mean, there's over 3,000 kids at that school. There are some kids at that school who do not want gun control. So would you be as happy if they weren't voting for gun control? Of course not, because you're only proud of them because they're there, and they're only because they're on your side, and that's why CNN and whatnot are only promoting that side of the spectrum, the people the kids who politically agree with them. Anyway, let's continue.
I stay out of anything that has to do with politics or religion or anything of the above.
Probably a good idea.
But in this particular case, I felt I needed to say something because
And this is whenever. So look, if you don't know what you're talking about, you shouldn't say things. It doesn't matter how you feel. Sorry.
some of my fans have been affected by this, and some of my fans are out there demonstrating about this. And I wanted to say something because I don't feel it's right that kids have to be the ones on the front lines of this fight.
Okay, well, look, people have been debating this issue for years, for decades, all right? This has been an issue that people have been fighting for decades. It's not just now that the kids decided to stand up and finally, now the world is going to change. That's not actually true, okay? What happened was people have been fighting for gun control for years, and then finally the media found their darling sweethearts that were going to push their message. I mean, so back in why do you think it is that you never see a conservative person victim on here? Like, why, back in the Las Vegas shooter, all of those country music fans, you think they're going to support gun control? Why didn't you? Why don't you think that CNN took those people in particular? Again, because they don't want to support gun control. The CNN only wants people. This is what they want. They want to take people, in particular, who agree with them, and put money behind them, and they want to take victims and use their victimhood to pass legislation that has nothing to do with solving gun crime. It's just things that they want to do anyway, and use that as a platform. They want to use dead children as a platform to launch their political aims. And it's just sick. But let's continue.
And I wanted to throw in my support and give my thoughts on the matter for whatever that may be worth. But to give you a background, I have an extensive background and experience with guns.
Yeah, sure you
My
do.
father was a 24-year Army man. He was a member of the NRA. He taught me about guns from a very early age, and he taught me to respect them and how.
I mean, isn't it amazing nowadays that just knowing what a gun is, knowing how to shoot a gun, that's the standard now. That's the standard that in order for you to be a political commentator on how to solve gun control issues. I mean, I thought it had something to do with like, law and morality and, political philosophy. But now, since liberals have set the bar so low that they don't know the difference between a semi-automatic and a fully automatic gun, you know, put one guy up here who actually knows how to shoot a gun, and all of a sudden he's an expert on gun control. Like, yeah, okay, man, maybe you're not as dumb as most people on the left that I've seen that think that you can go fully semi-automatic, or think that there's such thing as a ghost gun. We'll see, but look, that doesn't make you an expert on gun control policy. I'm sorry.
How to properly handle guns. I have gone to the shooting range many times. I've shot all kinds of guns. My dad even built muzzleloader rifles as a hobby. So when I say these things, just know that it's not coming from a place of ignorance.
Well, maybe not a place of ignorance with respect to guns, but it could be with respect to ignorance with respect to the Second Amendment, gun control policy, um, statistics on murders and other things like that.
And first and foremost, I want to say that I don't think people should be able to access assault rifles. There's no beating around the bush. There's no kidding about it. There's no exaggerations. Assault rifles exist solely to kill people. And you could say the same thing about all guns, but assault rifles especially, they don't have any purpose in hunting.
Okay, this is just plainly false, all right? And let me show you why, okay? First of all, there's this idea out here that assault rifles, let's just assume that he's talking about the AR-15 because that's typically what they're talking about. AR-15s are somehow so much deadlier. They're so devastating, right? But let's check this out. So here's a list of all of the guns, and first of all, I'll note that this is at the top here. You have the different rounds that you can use for hunting, right? The the .223 round is the one that's used in the AR-15. That's all the way down there between vermins and predators. That's what the AR-15 can shoot. So if the AR-15 isn't used in hunting, it's because it's not powerful enough. It's not powerful enough for deer hunting. The average deer hunting round is going to be the .308, which is a much more powerful round. It's a much bigger round, and it's much more deadly. There's nothing particularly deadly about the assault rifle or the AR-15 round. And it actually turns out that you can use this in hunting, and let me show you why. A lot of them use it in boar hunting, for example. And somebody inside of the comment section is saying that they aren't saying the rounds are much more deadly. Well, actually, some of them do. They say one of them, for example, said the muzzle velocity is like 3,000 feet per second or something like that. But something to note, AR-15 in particular, the amount of rounds depends upon the magazine size. You can get a larger magazine size for a hunting rifle, and the AR-15 is semi-automatic. So the semi-automatic, that means that there's one round for every single time you pull the trigger. That's a standard. Basically all handguns are like that. All handguns are one pull of the trigger, one bullet comes out. Most hunting rifles are like that too. It's just that most hunting rifles are going to be like a deer rifle, where they have a much more powerful bullet. Yeah, and he says so these guns come with the bigger magazines as standard. I mean, I'm not sure what the standard magazine size. I'll omit that for the sake of the argument. I mean, but if somebody wanted to murder somebody, right, then they could just get a bigger uh, magazine for. Take an extra trip to Amazon. I don't see that as a huge issue. Anyway, so yes, it is used in hunting, but there's also another purpose of the AR-15 round in particular. It doesn't have to be only for hunting. The purpose of the AR-15 round, or sorry, the AR-15 in particular, the main purpose is killing people. I agree with that, um, and it's for killing multiple people. So the reason for that is because um, the reason why we need that is because of the Second Amendment. Again, it's necessary for the security of a free state, for a well regulated militia. So the reason is ultimately, as I was talking about earlier, with respect to, let's see here, um, with respect to James Madison, where he was saying that if the federal government were to try to overtake the states, what would protect that is that every single man inside the states would have arms and be able to protect the state. And I talked about earlier about how this, since based upon James Madison's calculations, he was talking about this being applying to every single man, because he was talking about 500,000 people, which was the total number of able-bodied men, according to James Madison. So somebody in the comments section saying, having guns in the home is not part of well-regulated militia. But as I stated earlier in Miller versus U.S., it was expected at this time that people would have guns in their homes and bring it. And you can read at the last sentence here. When called for service, these men were expected to appear bearing arms supplied by themselves of, and of the kind in common use at the time. So the militia was expected to be formed of the people, of the whole people of the United States who were able to fight in a war, which at the time were men, who were supposed to have guns at the time. And so that's why, if we're going to have this kind of militia thing, you can argue against the militia, but if you're going to say, oh, well, the Second Amendment, I don't want to touch that, I want to keep the Second Amendment, then you have to admit that we need guns that are necessary for a militia inside the hands of the people. It's not practical for the government to have the state government to just hold guns inside of their safes, ready for whenever they're ready to defend against the federal government if it ever tried to overtake the state governments or anything like that. So, yeah. So we need AR-15s for the purposes of the Second Amendment. But anyway, I went on long enough on that. Let's continue with the video.
They have a purpose in self-defense only to the point where they can kill multiple people with a lot of bullets in a very large magazine. And I know I'm going out on a limb and just saying this outright, but I'm 100% in the field that we need to ban assault rifles. And
Yeah,
I
and
know
soon he's
that
going to
people
say that he still supports the Second Amendment.
will say that gun control laws are not the thing that can change this, or at least they'll say that it's not the only thing that can change this. But in my mind, why not do everything in our power to try to protect our kids?
Okay, I really hate this argument. So here's the thing. Okay, let me just use an example. Okay, everything in our power. Well, one thing that we could do is we could ban all schools. Like, I don't agree with that thing. I don't think that we should do that. But if you're going to take the position that we should do everything in our power to protect our kids. If we banned all schools, there would be no more school shootings. So why not do everything in our power to stop these massacres? Why not ban schools? Well, I assume you're going to say, well, that would be an ultimately negative effect, which I would agree with you, because it would reduce our education inside of this country. Most people, most parents are not going to be able to educate their kids to the degree to which public school system can. And I agree with that. But here's the thing: if you're going to say we should do whatever we can to protect our kids, then why not ban schools? Don't you care about the children? I mean, do you really care more about school education than dead children? I mean, but do you see why this is a dumb argument? Okay? There are some freedoms that we're not willing to give up because those freedoms are worth it, despite the fact that some people might die because of it. For example, driving cars. Thousands of people, more people than get killed by guns per year, definitely mass shootings per year, die inside of car accidents. But we don't say, let's do whatever it takes to save another life by banning all cars. We don't do that. It's because we think we have to do the costs and benefits. Now, if you want to argue that that banning AR-15s are going to be a better net effect than the net effect of not having a tyrannical government, then that's an argument you can make. But you have to make that argument. You can't just say we have to do everything that we can. And John in the chat saying we do regulate cars, we have speed limits, and yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm fine with having regulations on cars. I'm fine with having regulations on guns. For example, I don't think that people should be able to go out and brandish weapons inside of in public. I don't think people should be able to just shoot a gun out in the middle of nowhere, out in the middle of the city for no reason. I don't think that, obviously I don't think people should be able to go and commit a mass murder with a gun. That's illegal, right? So, but the question is, should we ban AR-15s? And here's the thing: I don't think that it would actually be effective. First of all, because criminals, when we're talking about mass shooters, these people are people that plan it out. It's premeditated. They usually go from they look at many different places. For example, whenever the movie theater shooting happened, I think it was during the Dark Knight release. The shooter looked at several different movie theaters. You know which one he chose? So actually, I think two of them didn't ban guns from going in there, and one of them did. Guess which one he did? He went in and shot at. He went in and shot at the movie theater that didn't allow guns. That had clear signs on the outside that said no guns allowed. Why? Because he knew that nobody was in there was going to shoot people with guns. It was going to shoot them. He knew nobody in there was going to have a gun. So he knew he would have free reign to kill people. So one of the proposals I would say is, let's get rid of these gun-free zones. Let's not have places where people don't have the right to defend themselves. Anyway, let's continue.
Or our people, or our fellow countrymen, or our neighbors. And in the avenue of trying to attack this from both sides, why don't we stop stigmatizing mental health? Why don't we stop treating it like some sort of problem that people just need to bear alone? That should be the first.
Okay, well, look, I don't think this is just an example of, I think a lot of people on the left, not everybody, but a lot of people on the left are just kind of pushing their preconceived ideas on here, okay? mental health, okay, it's obviously an issue, but I don't think that stigmatization's an issue. I don't think that mental health. I don't think that the reason. I don't think that school shooters are so worried about how society's going to treat them. I don't think they're like, hey, um, if I go out here and if I go and get mental health, the kids are going to make fun of me. I don't think that's I don't think that's an issue. I mean, if 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 it's an issue, then why would they go up and shoot up a school? I mean, people who are shooting up a school are obviously not that concerned with how society views them. Um, Society's not going to view somebody who shoots up the school. They're going to stigmatize them. I don't think that's the issue. I think it's just something that the left, uh, it's the whole hyper masculinity thing. We're telling boys that they can't cry, they can't go and uh, they can't go to mental health people. And I don't think that's a real issue.
First and foremost of everything, not just in these, but in general, because
Yeah,
there's so many people out there suffering silently with mental illnesses
yeah, in general, because I think it's a more particular thing.
that need help and are so afraid to go out and get it because of the way we treat it in this country. And also, why do we require more licensing and registration for cars than we do for guns? I know that people abide very closely by the Second Amendment.
Okay, so why do we need more license? Here's a good question. I think John brought this up in the chat too. Why do we need more licensing um, for driving? And here's another example. Okay, whenever we're talking about driving and licensing, right? We're talking about somebody going through a test, making sure they can drive a car responsibly and accurately and follow the laws and blah 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 blah, right? Okay, how would this? So whenever we're talking about guns, what are we talking about? Are we going to talking about people um, knowing how to load a gun, knowing how to shoot a gun? Are we talking about teaching people how to shoot a gun more accurately? Okay, so let's say we do that. How is that going to help mass shootings? Like, how does that help at all? Like, teaching a mass shooter how to shoot better is supposed to help prevent mass shootings. Okay, that's obviously counterproductive. We don't want the mass shooter to be a better shot. We want him to be a worse shot. So we don't want. So look again. This is just another thing. He's scared of guns, and he thinks that all these people are out there who don't know what they're doing. He's afraid that somebody's going to accidentally shoot him one day. That's the reason why. And he's just using the dead kids as a launch pad to propose policies that he thinks should happen anyway, because he's worried about his own safety, and he gets scared around guns. And then he's trying to he's just trying to use the dead kids as an excuse to pass gun laws that have nothing to do with the actual problem in this case. And the same thing with they always do this thing with like, oh, the gun show loopholes, or really that refers to private hand-to-hand transfers. Technically, you don't have to go through a background check if your uncle sells you a gun, right? And here's the thing. If we could pass a law to do that, none of the mass shooters, well, except for I think Virginia Tech, I think they did get their gun illegally from somebody who bought it for them, but those were actually handguns, so I don't know how that works. But anyway, most of the mass shootings, they got it legally through a background check. It's not actually going to solve any problems to do this with regards to mass shootings. And secondly, it would be completely impossible to enforce. Like, how are you going to know if somebody's uncle? How are you going to know if somebody's uncle sold him a gun? And John says Sandy Hook kid stole the guns from his mom's school. Yeah, that's true. And he shot his mom in the head and killed his mom. I mean, both of those acts are illegal. And it didn't stop him from going and shooting up a school. I mean, that just kind of proves my point. You're not going to be able to stop these mass shooters by creating these laws because they're just going to get the guns anyway. But let's continue.
And me, as a proud American, I'm very proud of our Constitution. But at the same time, there has to be some measure of control.
And here's the thing. If you're somebody who supports the Constitution and you think that people shouldn't own AR-15s or semi-automatic rifles, you really don't support the Constitution. You just misunderstand what the Constitution says. Because the Constitution is meant to give the people, as it says, the people, let me put this up here, the people, the right to bear arms. So that they can, in the case of the calling forth of the militia, bring their weapons to the militia to defend the state. That was the purpose of the Constitution. Now, they're not going to be able to do that with handguns. I think I said this before. So I think I'm repeating myself, so let's continue.
I know that people want to be able to bear arms, and I respect that. I come from a family that was all about that, but that doesn't mean that we can't have some measure of control over these extremely dangerous tools.
All right, we're not arguing against some measure of control. We're arguing against we're not arguing against some measure of control. We're arguing against bans of weapons which would be effective inside of a war against the federal government in the context of a state militia. All right, I think I've went on enough. John says, let me answer this by John. He says, Second Amendment doesn't say you can have any gun you want. And I agree with you. And he says you can't have fully automatic guns. And I agree. Actually, it's inside the United States, you can get a fully automatic gun actually, but it is very highly regulated and you have to pay for a tax stamp, which makes it extremely expensive. You have to go through fingerprinting and submit it to the United States government, and you have to register the gun. And, none of these fully automatic guns have ever been used in mass shootings because, semi-automatic guns are more effective anyway. But yeah, I agree with you. You don't have to, but I don't think you can ban. If you're going to say that the Second Amendment is a good thing and that we should be able to call up a militia from individuals, I don't think you can say that we should ban semi-automatic rifles, because then they're not going to have an ability to fight in a militia effectively. So I have one more video I want to go to, so let me just go ahead and go here.
Let's get to, first of all, how ridiculous it is for people to think that the Second Amendment protects them from tyranny. Didn't Waco solve that? We just had the anniversary of Waco a couple of weeks ago. Remember Waco? You know what they had in Waco? They had like 1.9 million rounds of ammunition. They had 50 caliber machine guns. They had grenades. What did the government have? Everything else. The winner and still champion, the United States government, thinking the Second Amendment can protect you from tyranny. It's like thinking the First Amendment protects you from Thor.
But isn't that
it's quaint, it's ridiculous, it's nonsensical, and they never get called at it. That's what they're screaming about right now in Houston.
This hypothetical that you're painting is terrifying, though. You're saying that nothing can protect us from tyranny. That's not in America.
Nothing but not guns, when the government has nuclear weapons and the F-22 and the Marine Corps in the drones.
All right. So this is a common argument. All right. So I think this is based on a misunderstanding, though. So a lot of people seem to think, and I think this is actually promoted by people on the right, probably, extremists like Alex Jones and like that Joe Bob out in the woods with with his friend, with his other hillbilly friends, are supposed to take on the U.S. government. That's not actually how it was originally conceived to happen. So going back to the Hamilton idea. So he actually kind of touches on this issue a little bit, talking about, again, he was talking about how it's not really practical to train all of the military to the degree to which, they would be as trained as a standing army. Because a standing army is paid full time. They do training all the time. They're going to be more effective than just a bunch of Minutemen coming up from the government, right? Coming up from the hills, right? All right. So what he suggested is that what we do is train a select number of people. Says, let's see, the attention of the government ought particularly to be directed to the formation of a select corps of a moderate extent upon such principles as will really fit them up for service in case of need. By thus circumscribing the plan, it will be possible to have an excellent body of well-trained militia ready to take the field whenever the defense of the state shall require it. So, in addition to the whole body of the people, he also suggested that we have a select number of people to be sort of the state militia full time. So I think today that would be considered the National Guard. So these are the people that you would give the tanks, and you would give the nuclear weapons, and you would give the F-22s and the drones. You give it to the state militia. I don't know if they do that already. I assume that they have some of those weapons. But if they don't, they should have it according to the original intent of the framers. You don't have to give every single individual person an F-22. And it's just not practical to do so. So I think what you could do, following what the founders said, is you can have the state government have the more powerful weapons inside of their sort of state militias. And in addition to that, you would also have the sort of Minutemen, or the individuals with the AR-15 to help along with that battle. And this also makes sense. So let's say China attacks, or North Korea attacks, or say a coalition between China and China and Russia and North Korea. Let's say they all decide to join together and attack the United States. So our army would, right now it's super powerful. It'll probably do pretty good, our standing army, against them, although it's spread across the world. But let's imagine they fight against this army, and they're starting to lose. Wouldn't it be a good idea for individuals inside of the state, so we had 350 million people. Let's say 1/25 of those people had weapons, had AR-15s. I'm not saying that them alone could take on the full force of Russia and China. Sorry about that. But if you have people in addition to the U.S. military who already have AR-15s, that will be useful in helping to protect the state against against these other countries. And that's sort of I think that's also part of the idea of the Second Amendment. That if you have every single person armed, it's a much better way of defending liberty than just having a particular, just a one standing army controlled by one man. Because today, really, we call the president the commander-in-chief. Well, here's another thing, and I'm just gonna address this, and I'll probably be done here. It says John Hines says this is fanciful. The U.S. is never going to be invaded. Here's the thing: we have to ask ourselves. Like I agree. I don't think the U.S. is going to be invaded anytime soon. Like probably not within my lifetime. But are we trying to form a nation to last our lifetime, or are we trying to build a nation to last to stand the test of time? Because like we don't know what's going to happen 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, whatever, into the future. And if we care about the kids of the future as much as we care about the kids of today, we want to make sure that foreign powers can't take over our country and enslave us. We want to make sure that people like Adolf Hitler, who very well could rise again sometime in the future, whether it be 100, 200, 300, whatever years in the future, we want to make sure that they can't do that. So we want to make sure that our country is as safe as possible. And that's why I personally support the Second Amendment. All right, guys, so this was kind of a test. I'm thinking about doing sort of like live streams like this. Next time I think I want to address radical feminist who believes that social norms are part of the patriarchy. So I'm going to try to do this like every Sunday night, see if I can do this. And if I don't get views, it's fine. I just like kind of expressing my opinion on this. So, but anyway, thanks for watching, and hopefully see you again.